welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Hosler, licensed physical therapist and certified strength and mobility coach. Here you can expect to hear about all things movement. The Movement Upgraded podcast is a blend of the science of strength training, rehab, and mobility, mixed with a personal and professional experience to provide you with the steps you need to keep your body pain-free and moving well, so you can do what you love forever. Hey, movement nerds. Welcome to podcast number 2, which is essentially part 2 of the first podcast. So if you have not listened to that one yet, pause this podcast right now, go back and check that out first, because we talked all about setting goals and covered the biggest, the big 3 things that people miss, or ways to make sure that you are as consistent with or setting goals that you can be as consistent with as possible. So I basically kind of helped to walk you through some of what I do when I work with people in goal setting and making sure that we are doing it in a way that we can be successful. Today, I am going to take you through applying that to movement and movement-related goals. In the first podcast, I gave you some movement examples, but I am going to go through a more specific framework, which is something that I use a lot with my clients, and I've made posts about this in the past. So we're going to cover the basics on movement. And like my podcast is focused on, and much of my work is focused on, the ultimate goal is just going to be getting you to age well and discover physical freedom, and maintain independence and your physical capabilities as long as possible. So this might mean you need to move more. So getting your steps up, exercising more, doing cars more frequently, adding in strength training, etc. We're going to cover that stuff. Or it just might be that you need to move better. So you might need to improve your joint health, increase your flexibility, gain better body control, PR your squat. Maybe you just want to build strength, or maybe you need a combination of both. So we're going to talk about moving more and moving better, and kind of how those goals look and how we can approach those. So I'm going to walk you through, to start, the basics of general recommendations for movement related to health and longevity. I'm doing this for 2 reasons. One, because I'm a physical therapist and I work with people who are in pain a lot. That's essentially half of my job. The other half is people who want to move better and just want to optimize their performance. But a lot of people are in pain and want to get out of it. And it turns out a lot of pain has to do, or a lot of getting out of pain has to do with the same healthy habits of just taking care of ourselves. And it's overall just approaching health. So I'm going to talk about the healthy habits related to movement, and I'm also going to talk about some things that you need to keep in mind as you're deciding what's best for you. We covered that a little bit in episode 1, but I'm going to hone in on more specifics today. Then I'm going to give you a few tips on making sure your approach is sustainable, as we discussed in episode 1. That way it's something that's realistic and doesn't end up being something that sidelines you with an injury. The 2 biggest things that cause people to abandon their pursuit or their new habit. And if you have ever been in the fitness industry and you've worked with people, or you've been this person that you're starting a new habit, or you're getting back into exercise, the biggest thing that happens besides burnout or just not being consistent and dropping off is we get injured. And injuries always go up when this happens because we have an increased spike in load. And so I want to make sure that's not you. So we're going to make sure that we are pursuing things in a way that's sustainable and mitigating our risk for injuries. So let's get started in the recommendations. So I like to funnel things down. Let's start more broad. We're going to start with what I like to call the big 4. And these are check boxes that I set for myself, and I help my clients set for themselves. And they are really based on the guidelines that is well supported by evidence on the foundation of movement for health. So if you're doing these pretty consistently, you are going to be decreasing your risk for chronic diseases and all of the things that we know exercise helps with. These are kind of like the foundation or the bare minimum, right? Again, the overarching theme here is age well and stay healthy for as long as possible. Then we'll funnel it down into more specific actionable things. So like I said, in episode 1, we always want to start with the big why. So the overarching theme, again, be healthy, age well. So I just kind of love using that, aging well. Hopefully that kind of makes sense to you, but that's like the best way I can describe my ultimate goal is I just want to feel good as I get older. I don't want to go down that path of I just feel more and more miserable as I get older, because a lot of that is not preventable, but like we can mitigate a lot of the, what's the word I'm looking for, effects of aging. Now we're going to move into the how. So we're funneling that down into how do I make sure I'm aging well from a movement standpoint. And this is again going to be something determined recommendations from like science, things we know that mitigate our risk for diseases. And chronic diseases include chronic pain, by the way. If you're somebody who has like chronic pain, the research is very consistent that it's one of those things that we need to approach kind of like type 2 diabetes, where we just need to really make sure we are covering the basics of our taking care of ourselves and taking care of our bodies. That was something that was really fascinating for me to learn once I got into PT school, because I thought they were going to be like, yeah, chronic pain is because your pelvis is out of alignment, you have scar tissue, or you need to foam roll. But it turns out majority of the pain issues that we have are because you need to move more, you need to do things like cars, and we need to sleep better and things like that, which I'm not covering today. So without further ado, let's talk about the big 4. I made a post about this in Instagram, so if you like visuals, you can go check that out. But let's cover them. The first one is making sure we are doing 150 or 70 minutes of exercise per week. The 150 is moderate intensity, and the 70 minutes is if your exercise is vigorous intensity. If you're not sure about intensity, the CDC has great resources on their website for this. So this information straight off of their website, they have like information on what would count. So how hard do you have to work out for it to be considered moderate, or how hard is it before it's vigorous? And you can mix these, of course. So you can do some moderate, some vigorous. They have that explanation too on their website. You could probably just Google physical activity guidelines CDC and it'll pop up for you. But the most simple way that we use often is whether or not you can easily talk during your exercise. So if you can talk during the activity, but you cannot sing, so that's where we'll delineate it, then it's moderate. But if you can't talk more than a couple words, you're probably doing vigorous activity. So that is something to keep in mind. Whether or not your walk is considered moderate, or if it's not intense enough to even be moderate, is just, are you walking at an intensity where you can talk but you can't sing? Then it's considered moderate and it counts as moderate. So that is number 1. Number 2 of the big 4 is 2 days of strength training per week. In a future podcast, I will break down what actually strength training is and what counts. I don't necessarily completely agree with the way the CDC explains it. I don't know if it's enough, mostly because of, I think we need a little bit more, particularly as for anybody who is a woman, because we have an increased risk for bone issues, and I want you to optimize your bone health, and I think you need a little bit more than what the CDC says. But that recommendation and their website is a great place to start. So if you're not strength training, that's where you want to start, and we go from there, right? So we want to be consistent and get started. That's okay. Eventually we can optimize, and I will be talking about that in a future podcast, just not today. So that's number 2. And then we want to make sure we are doing 7,000 to 8,000 steps a day on average. I referenced this in the last podcast, but the 7,000 to 8,000 is actually where our risk for chronic diseases starts to decline. So it's not 10,000, but every bit of steps you do that's increased or more also correlates with an equal amount of decreased risk for diseases. So more will be better, but the bare minimum to aim for is 7,000 to 8,000 on average. So let's move into number 4. And this is not on the CDC's website. This is my own professional recommendation, but I think we are really, truly neglecting this and we don't know how to approach it in the mainstream. And this is actually one of my big goals, is to get more people to understand this. But daily cars and breath work is number 4. So we don't really know what cars are in the mainstream, right? So that's okay, but they are really important. We will say things like flexibility and we need to add stretches, but they're not specific enough, and stretches are not necessarily the way to keep our joints healthy. And I'm not going to cover all of why cars are the answer. We do cover that in our cars course, the Beginner's Guide to Mobility. If you want to check that out, you can. It's on our website, movementupgraded.com, but we just know we need to do them every day. Like, we brush our teeth every day. It's really important to take care of our joints every day. There's nothing else that we're doing that's really tackling that. Yes, exercise is better than sitting all day long, but it's still not getting every joint its full range of motion. So we're not covering everything. There's missing pieces. Cars fills that in. And I added breath work in there because it is so important and it is a low-hanging fruit, and I'm all about those low-hanging fruits. So I added that in with the cars for your 4th part of the big 4. So these are the overarching 4 things that you want to consider when it comes to movement-related goals. I will stop here and just tell you, if you're overwhelmed and you're like, I don't hit any of those things, I don't want you to go down this panic mode, right? Like, just, it's not going to be helpful. I know that we'll want to tend to like get overwhelmed and be like, I don't do any of those things. I'm pretty sure like 80% of the population, maybe even more, doesn't even meet number 1. A lot of fitness people I know don't even meet number 1. So again, if it's you, don't panic. Don't stop the podcast. Like, don't do that. Let's just remember that mindset's really important, and any increase in movement that you do for setting a goal over the next like few months compared to what you do now is going to have an ROI on your health. Like, it's going to have a return on investment on your health, and that's absolutely worth chasing. So if you are not checking every one of those boxes off in the next year, anything you do that moves you towards being able to check that box off is going to bring you closer to the overarching goal of aging well and being healthy. So it's worth pursuing. It's worth pursuing even if it's not perfect. I cannot say that enough. Now that we covered that and understand that it's worth pursuing, let's talk about where to start. You got to figure out where you are. So we got to be realistic. We got to understand, where are you? Do you have any of those boxes checked currently? If you do, awesome, congrats, like give yourself a high five. It's honestly, like you really should celebrate that, because a lot of people do not. If you're not, it's okay. Are there anything that you're really close to checking off consistently with maybe like a small habit change? So maybe you're not exercising enough, maybe you're not strength training at all, and maybe you're not even doing your daily cars, but like you walk on average like 6,000, maybe 6,500 steps a day. Maybe if you just added like a little bit longer of a walk, or you went for an extra walk during the day, you'd probably consistently hit 7,000 to 8,000 steps. And that would be a great place to start. I'm not even telling you to start on cars. Like, who am I? Just kidding. Because I really think it has to do with success. So success builds self-trust, and it builds momentum, and it gets us to do more things. So I usually say start with the smallest thing that can give you some sort of success. If that's not close for you to achieve and you're still like, no, I don't even know how many steps I take. It's okay, by the way. You don't even need to track your steps if that's something that is hard for you. There's other measures or ways of figuring that out. And likely if you are running or walking to get your exercise guidelines, you're probably hitting that. It's more about regular movement, but steps is just something that's easy to track for most people, as long as you're not becoming obsessive, which then is no longer healthy for you. Keep that in mind. But moving forward, I just want you to figure out where you are. So like look at your average from the past like few months and look at how much cardio, how much strength training, how much general exercise, how much steps, and how often you're doing your cars. And if you don't know, then maybe just like track yourself or figure out where you are for the next like 2 weeks. Maybe your goal is just to figure out where you are. It's not even to make a change, right? So only you know that. Figure that out. And from there, we have to figure out what's realistic for you and what can you be the most consistent with, and what's something you'd like to achieve. So here we are talking about what you like to do, like what's interesting, because that's going to breed, it's going to make it attractive, right? You're going to do something you already like. So maybe you love exercise and you really don't like walking. So your goal is not necessarily worrying about your steps. Maybe your goal is going to be targeting adding a day of strength training because you're really only doing one right now and you want to do two. I don't know. That's just an example. You just need to figure out what's realistic for you. So something you can do and something that you might like doing, or something that will help you achieve a goal that is like important to you. Like if you want to feel strong and powerful, then you want to learn how to lift and add some strength training to your life. Those are things that you'll have to kind of unpack and figure out yourself. The two low-hanging fruits for movement, though, are going to be steps and daily cars, which is why I keep mentioning them. They are accessible for majority of people. I understand that not everybody has a safe place to walk, or if you live somewhere where the wind chill is like ridiculous, walking might not be your goal. But for a majority of people, steps and cars are going to be fairly accessible. So getting your steps up can be a great stepping stone, because once you get your steps up, you're checking that goal. And then if you are not exercising enough regularly, like you're not hitting that 150 minutes or 70 minutes of exercise, but you get all your steps in, maybe you just walk a little bit faster then after you're achieving that goal regularly. And now you're not just getting all your steps in, but you're also getting your exercise guidelines in. So that's awesome. And cars are they're so simple. I know they seem kind of complicated when you first learn them. I get it, but they're really not. And once you have gone through the routine a few times, it doesn't even have to be perfect and you're already getting benefits from them. And it's just the simplest way to make sure you are keeping your joints healthy, like getting healthy cartilage and getting good stuff into your joints. Like you can take all of the supplements you want, but it's not going to actually get into your joints because we don't have blood supply in them unless you are taking your joint through its full range of motion. And most of our daily lives are not going to take our hip into full internal rotation, for example. So cars does that. You don't have to think about it. Again, those are just like the simplest thing. And if you want to be able to reach your hand behind your back as you get older, better be doing your cars, because how often do you do that on a regular basis? Like if you want to maintain it, make sure you're exposing your shoulder to that position every single day or as often as possible. Cool. Okay, so let's talk about breaking it up so that it's not super like taxing. You don't have to do all of your steps at once. You can add 5 or 10 minutes here or there. Like I do usually, my goal is 2 walks per day. And I noticed since we have gotten back from our trip to Indiana that we do for Christmas to be with our family, because that's where I'm from. That's where my husband Ryan is from. It's been kind of hard, even since we moved last year. It's just been harder to walk because in our apartment, I hated living there. So we would just leave and try to walk as much as possible. Now I love my house. I don't want to leave it. So I realized that I have not been hitting what I like for myself, which is 10 to 12,000 steps. So I started to try to get a third walk in there, even though I really don't want to, but that's what we're doing because I have a goal and my emotions don't matter a ton. So it can be broken up, and your exercise can be broken up. Like you're not doing 150 minutes all at once. Cars are the same way. A full cars routine takes 5 to 6 minutes, like an express version. On like a good day, it'll take 10 to 15 if you're like going slow, being intentional, doing a few more reps. But when it comes to cars, you just do as little as you need to, but as much as you can. So when you can do more, but if you need to just do a little, then do a little. But you want to keep the ball rolling. You want to keep doing those types of things just to stay consistent with it. So that is how, and again, I think a routine can be 5 to 6 minutes if you're doing head to toe. But again, I think I've mentioned this earlier or in the last episode, you can break them up. Like You don't need to do your neck cars and your shoulder cars all together. You can do a couple here and there. I love injecting. I literally think of like an injection because you're squirting like good. Sounds like such a weird way to describe it, but you're getting your synovial fluid and you're squirting like good stuff in your joint every time you do cars. So I like to think about like injecting cars into different times of the day. Like if you're waiting for your food to cook, do some ankle cars or neck cars. If you are going for a walk or sitting in your car, do some wrist cars. Like something that's not going to put you at jeopardy for what you're doing. Like it might be hard to do neck cars while you're walking, right? That's dangerous. But your wrist you could do if you're walking at a leisure walk, or you're walking with your dog and he's pooping, because that happens all the time and you will see me doing that. So you're waiting at the gas station, do some shoulder or hip cars, be the weirdo. I'm the weirdo. Like let's make a lot of movement weirdos doing cars at the gas station or rest stops. So inject movement throughout the day, do your cars whenever you need to get them done. Yeah, I think that was what I wanted to cover for that. The thing that I want to make sure that we do when we're setting these movement goals, and I talked about this again in the previous episode, is making sure that it's sustainable. So I've talked a little bit about making sure that it's not too hard. It's not too big of a jump, because we're not going to be consistent with that. If it's a big change, there's a lot more resistance to that. There's going to be resistance to changing anything, but the bigger of the change, the bigger resistance. But also, when it comes to movement specifically, when we are increasing a lot of movement, we are changing and adding a lot of load to our bodies, and that's an increased demand on our bodies. And if we are having a big increase in movement like that without making sure that we are giving ourselves enough rest, we are increasing our risk for injuries. And I don't want you to get injured, because I want you to be able to keep doing this stuff. And if you injure, you are going to be inconsistent. Or if you get injured, you're going to be inconsistent. We cannot prevent injuries, by the way, but we can mitigate them, meaning they will be less likely that they will occur. They will be less severe if and when they occur, and our recovery time will be better. So I want you to mitigate your injuries by understanding how to manage your load, which means not just jumping into a bunch of new exercise routines, and progress slowly. And I talk about this a lot, but it's really, really important. We have to really understand that over time, if we have not been exercising or walking regularly, without doing that, our bodies are getting weaker, more frail, less mobile, and less fit. This is not me shaming you. It's me literally completely objectively saying this is the reality of our lives. We have to get really clear on, okay, when is the last time I was doing that? How many months have gone by? How many years have gone by? I get it if you're this is something that is, I talk to middle-aged people about a lot, because sometimes we'll kind of think of ourselves in our most fit times of our lives, like in high school or something, and we'll think, I did it then, this is how I did it then, so I'm going to do that like this now. So maybe back then, to get really strong and fit, they just jumped into lifting 3 or 4 days a week and running multiple days, right? But back then, they were also regularly exercising, participating in sports. And so it wasn't as big of a jump as now, where they regularly are barely moving. We're sitting at a desk, or we're sitting a lot, or we're not doing exercise or doing these types of movements. And then all of a sudden we're like, yeah, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to approach it the same way I did back then. You are not the same body. It's not fair to your body. I know that we like to do the things that have worked in the past, but that's not always the best thing to do. And again, sometimes this is why a professional is helpful. But if you just can look at where you are and really be like, okay, I'm not there right now. I'm here. And it sucks sometimes. Don't get me wrong. I will acknowledge that. But we have to be honest with ourselves to really provide ourselves with the self-care that we deserve. And meet our bodies where we are. So it takes weeks and months or years to rebuild that back up again. You'll not progress day to day or week to week necessarily. If you are lifting, for example, those gains will happen faster. So your strength will come back faster, because that usually has more to do with neurological changes, which are pretty quick. When it comes to cardio, progress takes way longer, and most people just try to PR their mile or go faster or reach a new peak every single time, and that will work until it doesn't. And the older you get, the less long you will be able to do that, because that would literally be the equivalent of going in and trying to lift as much weight as you could every time. And there are people that do that too, but it does not work for long. It works until it doesn't, and then they get injured or they plateau and they burn out and they're like, screw this, it's not fun, because you're going at a max all the time. The more intense you are with your exercise, the less frequent you will be with it, because we will need more recovery. And the more intensity that we are approaching exercise, the longer we need to recover from it. The less recovery we're giving ourselves, the more likely we are to end up with an injury or some pain. So cardio progress will take a really long time, because you're really just stressing your body a little bit, giving it recovery, it's adapting, and you're having to do that forever. Strength training, again, is faster. Mobility progress, however, it takes eons. Like eons. Sometimes if it's more neurological, we'll have some progress faster. But like if you've done kin stretch or you've worked with me, you know this, like you'll be so excited that you can actually just move your big toe, like see a movement happen. Or you'll be so excited that you can lift your leg off the ground an inch, a half an inch, a quarter of an inch. Like that's how small it is. So think millimeters of progress over time. The faster the mobility progress or your cardio progress happens, likely, so like let's talk about mobility mostly, the faster it happens, the less likely it is to be like a physiological adaptation or like a more permanent change. And the more likely it is, like the more likely you will lose that progress quickly. So I know it's really popular in Instagram and like fitness world to be like, look at these quick changes I made. You can foam roll and all of a sudden your shoulders can go completely overhead, which is fine, but like that's not really training it, and you'll have to do that every time because you're going to lose that range of motion in between. It's just not consistent. So keep that in mind as you're approaching mobility. You're not making like true physiological adaptations. You're just tricking your nervous system into giving you a little more range of motion temporarily, and you'll be right back to square one next time. Unless you're super consistent with that and are actually training your body to maintain that strength over time and progressively overloading it. So all that to say, progress isn't always the goal with movement. Like you're not looking to PR things. You're not testing yourself every time. Really, consistency will win every single match. So when it comes to all of this, we're not measuring like our strength and our cardio capacity. We're not looking for our VO2 max to go up, and we're not even measuring our squat regularly. We're just trying to maybe make slow progress, but in the end, it's just like about showing up, especially when it's a new habit. Like that's really important to understand. Like if you're just trying to get those big four boxes checked, consistency is going to win the match. Now, let's say you are somebody who has done well with checking those boxes consistently and you're ready to level up your game. Where do you go from there? So if you're still listening, you might not have been because you're like, I already do all these things. Let's talk about if you're pretty consistent with those boxes being checked already, but you are like wanting to get more specific with your movement. Having like a specific movement goal, such as the splits maybe, or doing a back bend, or maybe you just want to squat deeper, or maybe you want to squat without your hip pinching, or maybe you want to deadlift without back pain, or you just want to progress like your lift and to like be stronger. These require an assessment. So this is more specific. So the more specific we're getting, the more specific we have to be in understanding where you are. So I talked about everything's going to require an assessment, but sometimes you can do the assessment yourself. But the more specific we're getting with movement, the more that you need to know about movement to be able to get you to the goal that you want. You're probably not a movement expert, which I wouldn't expect you to be if you haven't dedicated your professional life and career towards movement. So sometimes you need help. But we really can't choose the path to know where you need to go to be able to do the splits or do a back bend until we know where you are. You also need to know what the movement requires your body to do, what your joints need to do, and what you're currently able to do or not. Then we have to close those gaps with targeted specific work. A deeper squat, for example, might require more ankle mobility. You might need more knee tolerance to load because your knee hurts, or it's just like uncomfortable and it's not allowing you to go very deep. You might just need more hip mobility. You might need better pelvis and rib cage positioning, or you might need more spine mobility. I don't know what you need until I know what you are lacking in. And hiring somebody to help you learn about your body is going to be the only way, unless you just want to like learn all of those things on your own. If you cannot afford or don't prefer to work with somebody on a one-on-one basis, that's what I do virtually and in Tampa in person. Again, if you can't afford it or you don't want to, you like figuring things out on your own, your next best option would be something like a Kinstretch class. So I have Kinstretch memberships, and that's part of why that exists. While the end goal of Kinstretch is these are mobility and body control classes that are all on the membership. The goal is better body control and optimizing your mobility. The exercises that are helpful in working towards those things will also teach you a lot about your body, and you'll get to know what you lack. It's a little bit more of a roundabout way. It's not the perfect assessment, but you'll start to learn things, and everybody in those classes learn a lot about their body because I explain a lot in them. And oftentimes you can steal those drills or exercises from the classes and then start to tinker with them in your own training. And if you're like more of a do-it-yourself, I just kind of like to figure things out here and there type of person, that's a perfect way to do it. If you're not like, I've got to figure this out now, and you just kind of want to learn more and play around with that, Kinstretch can be a great way to do that. Plus, if you do that and then you're like, all right, I'm hitting a plateau, I don't know what else to do, and you've done a lot of the Kinstretch work and playing around with your own programming, and you do eventually want to get a full assessment, it's actually way more helpful the more you know about your body, because you'll be able to work with a coach and communicate things better, and you'll probably get results faster. So that's kind of a win-win. So if you're interested in that, you can go to movementupgraded.com. We have the Kinstretch membership on there. If you want to get started on cars, so if you're somebody who's like, I just want to get consistent with cars, I have a whole routine saved from an Instagram live I did a while ago. It's on my Instagram feed. You can scroll back through it and find it. Or if you really want to know and understand the why, what they are, and some of the background, plus you want access to the different variations, plus you want access to some of the routines you can follow, we have that all together in a mobility course called Beginner's Guide to Mobility. So you do get the coaching breakdown of cars and how to do them. You get videos that are kind of like, it's a mini course. So you'll get the videos of me explaining why, you get some coaching explanation of the different cars from myself and from my husband, Ryan, who is a Chiro mobility specialist and strength coach as well. And you get that library for all of those. So we have also a few pre-recorded cars routines that you can follow along with. If you want like a routine to follow that's like a normal routine, we've got an express version. So it's like really quick, like 10 minutes, or maybe it's even like 7 or 8 minutes. And then we have a full seated routine too. So if you're stuck in space, with limited space, you can do that. So those are ways that you can get started with the mobility specific work if it's not something you're currently working at. And hopefully, I think that was everything we wanted to cover today. So hopefully that kind of got your brains going about what you can start to do, where you can move forward in your current movement routines. I think that's everything we're going to cover today. So thank you so much for listening. If it was helpful, again, don't forget to leave me a review, share with a friend. Somebody needs to hear this. I am only going to be able to keep the podcast up and if it's growing, and that's the only way to do it. So thanks in advance if you've already done that. And as always, I appreciate you. Don't forget to do your cars today, and I will see you next time.